For today's project, we're going to be making the cowl that you saw at the opening of this video, and we're going to be using some chunky loops and threads biggie yarn. You just need 2 skeins of that. And I was inspired when I tried my hand at Tunisian crochet, and I got the long hook at the craft store and did it, and I really liked the results of it, but it took me forever just to make a dishcloth. But as I was doing it, I decided that my arm was kind of like a Tunisian crochet hook, because if you know what those hooks are, they're long, and you keep your stitches on it. So I thought, well, why not try to do that same process, but instead of using the hook, use my arm. So that's what we're going to do today. And to get started making this cowl, it's real simple, and you don't need to know how to crochet. It's just some really basic things that you're going to see during this video, and the results are really nice. So the first thing we want to do to start is just make a slip stitch in the end of our yarn. And once you have that slip stitch, we're going to then chain for this cowl 4. And you just go ahead and chain those loosely. So I'm going to make 4 chains. There's 3 and there's 4. So I have 4 chains made. That's our foundation for the cowl that we're creating today. So let's go ahead and get started by putting the stitches together on this. Here are the 4 chains that I just created, and then I have the loop on the end, which is the working loop. What I need to do to get started is just slide my right hand through. If you're left-handed, do it just the opposite, I guess. And I want to pull the working yarn a little bit tighter back there. So I have the loop on my wrist, I have my 4 chains, and I have my working yarn behind us. The first thing I want to do to get started is work with my 4 chains, and I'm going to skip this first one because what's on my wrist right now is actually considered this chain here. So I'm going to go to the next chain, and all I'm doing is I'm putting my finger through the front of this, and I'm pulling up the working yarn in the back, and I'm slipping it right onto my wrist. And I like to tighten these up, so I want to keep my stitches nice and neat. So now I have 2 on there, and I'm going to go to the next chain here, put my finger through to the back side, and just pull the loop up and slide it over my wrist. We're at 3 at this point. Final chain here. Again, I'm going to just stick my finger through, grab the yarn from the back, and slide it over my wrist. And again, I'm going to make sure that those are nice and snug. So you can see I have 4 chains on my wrist, 4 loops, I guess I will call them, and that's the beginning foundation to create this cowl. And with this project, we're only going to be using our right hand. Unlike arm knitting, where you have to use both hands and have the yarn back and forth, with arm crochet, what I found when I started creating this one using the Tunisian method is that I'm only using my right arm, and this will work up really quickly. So we have our base. Now we're going to move on and start actually making our rows. So to get started on this next round, all I need to do is hold the yarn in my fist, and I just put it between my fingers like this, and then I just close my fist around it. So I take this loop that's closest to my hand and I slide it over, and I'm going to do this very slowly to start with. You don't have to go this slow, but I want to show you what I'm doing. So I'm holding the yarn here, I'm sliding this first loop off of my arm over that yarn, and then I'm just holding that loop that I'm sliding off, and I'm putting the yarn through that, my working yarn. So we still have now 4 loops on my arm, because on the first round coming back this way we only go through the very first loop that we have on our arm. So I still have 4 loops on my arm. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hold this yarn in my fist, and I'm going to now pull 2 of the loops off of my arm. And again, I'm doing this very slowly just so you can see. I'm pulling it off, I'm holding the working yarn, and when I get this, I just hold on to keep my stitches nice and tight. I just hold on to those 2 loops as well, and I pull that working loop up and I put it onto my wrist, and I keep it all nice and tight. So we've gone now from 4 loops on my wrist to 3, and we go ahead now and do the same thing. We hold on to this working yarn, take the next 2 loops, slide them over my hand, and then I hold on to those 2 and I pull that working yarn through and put it onto my wrist, and now we're down to 2 loops on the wrist. The final one that we do, again, hold on to that working yarn and take these last 2 loops and slide them over your hand, hold on to them, pull that yarn through, put it on your wrist, and that is the second round. Now here's the interesting part about Tunisian crochet, is that we're actually going to be working, there's vertical stitches that come across with Tunisian, and that's what we're going to be working in as we go back across. You can see, hopefully, that there's 1 vertical stitch, here's another vertical stitch, here's another vertical stitch, and here's the 4th vertical stitch. Those are what we work through now coming back for this next round. We ignore this one that's right next to the loop on my wrist, because this loop is going to count as that stitch. So I only need to come back and do 3 more stitches. So what I do is I put my finger through that first vertical stitch, and you see I'm pulling the yarn through. I'm trying to get a good shot of this for you. I'm just pulling the yarn through that vertical stitch, and I'm going to put that yarn up on my wrist. So we've gone through 1 of them. We have these 2 left to do right here. Those, I guess we could call them vertical bars. I think that's what they call them in Tunisian crochet. I'm not trying to use the same terms as what they use, but these bars here. So we have 2 more to do, and all I need to do is put my finger through one of that next one and bring that yarn up on my arm. And we do the same for the last one. Put my fingers through, grab the working yarn, and just put it up on my wrist. And now we're starting to get our pattern going. And this is going to be the pattern for this particular cowl that we're making. You're going to have these 4 vertical bars across. And it weaves it to some degree, because what we do when we get this is we're actually weaving back through, our next round we'll weave back through these loops on my arm, and then we'll come back and we'll create those bars again. So it's just a back and forth process that we're doing to create the cowl that you're going to be able to wrap around your neck a couple of times. So quite simple. So now I'm going to do again the same thing. I'm going to hold on to my working yarn. You can see I've got my fist made. If I get my other hand out of the way, I've got my fist made. I've got my working yarn held in it. I'm going to just come pull just 1. The first one is only 1. Hold on to that. Bring the yarn back up over your wrist, your working yarn, and then snug it up. So first one coming back is only one loop on your arm. After that, it's always going to be two until you get down to only having one left. So I've got my first one done. I'm holding on to my yarn again, and I'm going to take two across. Hold on to those two, bring that loop up on your arm, keep it nice and tight so your stitches don't get all loose. And now we're down to 3 loops on my arm. Again, pull 2 over your hand, hold on to those 2, bring the working yarn in onto your wrist, and we have one more to do. So this is building up very quickly. Hold on to the yarn, pull these 2 up over my hand, hold on to them, and then put your working yarn back on. And here we go again. And you stretch that out. You can easily see the 4 bars that we have going for this. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 again. Those are the 4 bars that we're now going to come through this next time around and do the same thing. Now we just keep building on those stitches that we just learned, and I stuck a needle through just so you can see again that we're going to be working through those 4 vertical bars that we're creating each time. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to do a couple more rows with you, and then I'm going to finish this off. The 2 skeins takes about 30 minutes to create. So you're going to have one long piece in about 30 minutes, and then all we need to do at the end is finish off our work, and then what I'm going to do is whip stitch the 2 ends together so we have a big loop. So let's do a couple more rounds together, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish this, get this to the length I need it, and then come back and show you how to finish off your work. So again, I have my working loop on my wrist. I've got my 4 vertical bars here. This vertical bar that's closest to my hand, we don't work with. The loop on my wrist is takes care of that one, so we don't have to do anything with that vertical bar. So I'm going to go to the next vertical bar, and I'm going to just put my fingers through it, grab the yarn from behind, and just slide it onto my wrist. Go to the next vertical bar here, put my finger through it, slide it onto my wrist, the working yarn. And then the last vertical bar I have here, finger through the working and slide it up onto my wrist. So there we go. I mean, you can see that this is, again, getting to be a pretty good size very quickly. Coming back on this, again, remember, for the first time coming back, we only take the first loop off. Every one after that, we go 2 stitches or 2 loops at a time. I'm going to hold the yarn in my fist. I'm going to slide this first one over my hand, holding it still and putting that working yarn onto my wrist. Hold the yarn again in my fist, take 2 of these on my wrist, slide them over my hand, hold on to those 2, pull the working yarn up, slide it onto my wrist. And again, the reason that I hold on to those 2 as I'm sliding them and keep holding them until I have that working yarn on my wrist is to keep all of my stitches nice and tight. We don't want big gaps. So I'm going to, again now, put the working yarn in my fist, pull the next 2 loops off of my arm, hold on to them, pull the working yarn through, and slide it onto my wrist. We're down to 2 loops on the arm. This is the final one then. Hold the yarn in the fist, pull these last 2 over the wrist, hold on to them, put the working yarn back on there, and there we go. And here again we have our 4 verticals. You can see that. And it's tough to show sometimes, so I thought this is the easiest way to show where those bars are, by putting a needle right through it. And now when I hold this up, you can see that our stitches it makes a nice pattern. It's kind of like a weaving pattern. So we're going to keep doing exactly those 2 things. Work now into these vertical bars, and then come back and slide the loops off of your wrist, and just keep doing those 2 until you get to the desired length of your cowl. So we'll come back and I'll show you then how to actually finish off the work and get it so you're all set to go outside and enjoy the cold weather. Alright, it's time for me to finish mine off. The 2 skeins that I put together right now measures about 60 inches long. So I'm going to finish this off. I want to leave enough yarn that when I finish this off I can then slip stitch the 2 ends together to form the ring, which will make up the cowl. So to finish off, it's really simple. I have my working yarn, the loop on my wrist, and what I'm going to do is, again, working in these front loops, and try and get another picture of this, working in these front loops, I'm going to bring them up onto my wrist, and instead of continuing all the way across, I'm going to show you how to finish off on each one of these. So I'm going to start by bringing a loop up into that vertical stitch right there. So now I have 2 loops on my wrist, and what I'm going to do is, instead of continuing to work through these front loops, I'm going to take the yarn and hold it in my fist, and I'm going to pull these 2 loops over. And I'm trying to get a good photo of this, but I'm going to pull these 2 loops off my wrist, and I'm going to put the 1 loop back on to my wrist. So I'm kind of binding off each of these stitches. So I'm going to go into this next front loop here, and I'm going to pull the yarn through that, put it on my wrist. So I've got 2 back on my wrist. I'm going to put the yarn into my fist, and I'm going to pull these 2 off of my wrist. And keep it tight, because you don't want these top stitches all real loose. You'd like to have them as tight as possible. And I'm going to put that loop, the working loop, back onto my wrist. And that leaves only 1 more of my vertical stitches here. So I'm going to pull the yarn through that onto my wrist, and do the same thing again. I'm going to hold the yarn in my fist, and I'm going to pull both of these 2 loops off of my wrist. And that leaves me now with just this loop at the end. And the way I'm going to finish that off is I'm going to just slip my working yarn through it, and I'm leaving all of this yarn on here because I want to, again, use it to whip stitch, or I haven't decided yet which way I'm going to do it, but either whip stitch or slip stitch the 2 ends together. So I'm just pulling that end tight. So there's the top then of the strip that we have here. Alright, I have the finished end that we just did, and then I have my beginning end, and I've put the wrong sides together. So I want to have a loop with my right sides facing out, and to finish it off, we don't have to be real picky, because this is so bulky, and the back side is going to be on the back of your neck, or the seam, I should say, is going to be on the back of your neck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the working yarn, And I'm going to just go from my end that we finished off to the beginning and whip them together. I've decided a whip stitch will work just fine. So take your yarn, just start putting it through the one on the beginning that we started at and put it through one of the stitches where we ended, and come back over again and do the same thing, just through one stitch on each end and whip that together. And let's see, let me get that up there. Another one, whip it together. And I like to make sure that my ends are really secure, so I don't want to have this thing, you know, start coming apart or having a gap at the end. So I might just do a couple extras on there. So there's what you have, and what I'm going to do is with this beginning tail that we had, I'm going to whip stitch that into my ending piece as well, so that that closes up that side a little bit tighter. And again, you don't have to be real fussy about this. Nobody's going to really be seeing this part of it because the seam is going to be in the back when you put it on. And I'm going to just, you know, keep doing this. I'm going to take this yarn through now to the reverse side. And with this, a lot of times I don't knot when I make pieces, but when I do something this chunky, I would weave it through on the back side and then do a slip knot so you know that it's going to stay in place. So that's what you want to do. Finish it off, whip stitch the two ends together, put your working yarn and your beginning tail behind your work, thread it in, knot it, and then let's try it on. So here we have it. This is the final product. After whip stitching the two ends together, I took the ends of the yarn and put it on the back side of the work and weaved it in, and then I knotted it. I slipped this over my head twice, and I think it's really nice. It's comfortable, warm, cozy. The difference between this one that we just made and the one that I have on at the beginning of this video is this one we only did 4 chains, and the one at the beginning of the video I did 6 chains. I'm going to say I like this one better because it's not as tight, but you can make it, you know, whatever width you like. This is bulky yarn, so keep that in mind when you decide how many chains you want to start with. I like the 4, but if you want to go, you know, a little bit bulkier and heavier, go with 6. So that's it. If you like this video and like to learn how to do stuff like this, like I do, subscribe to my feed here and you'll make sure and get everything that I do going forward. I know in my last episode I said I was going to do a finger crochet afghan, and I think that's actually going to be my next episode. So it's really cold here and I think that would be a good project to do. So thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.